Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pints and Politics. We got another Zoom meeting for you. As always, my name is Drew, and we're here with Mike Weiner, the co-host of the show. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm good. I'm adjusting my screen a little bit. It looks kind of dark. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not.
Yeah, you're
So,
a beacon of light as always.
beacon of light. I love it. That's probably a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, we just got through the first two session of the legislature, and I've heard some interesting stories going on. For example, we had a Supreme Court hearing that said you guys don't have a quorum right now with 67 legislators, and also that there was a protest last Tuesday. What do you know about that?
Well, it's been pretty eventful 2 weeks, even though nothing has gotten done.
Really?
Um,
Nothing?
well, basically, the court decision said that in order to have a quorum, we have to have 68 present. So, in order to organize and put everything together in the House, vote in leadership, we have to have more than our 67 members. We have to have at least one Democrat to show up. The Democrats had a secret swearing in ceremony 2 days before, I think it was 2 days before the official start to session. So I'm kind of questioning that in a way if that's even valid. That has not been discussed yet on the courts, anyways.
Yeah. How
But
do you have a secret swearing in, especially for
good question.
Congress?
I was never invited to that. So
Yeah. So how do we know it even happened?
good question.
Yeah.
You know,
If
and,
it's
and
secret.
it's set up by statute that it's supposed to be done, you know, in a certain way first
Mhm.
day of session, and we're all supposed to be there basically. But there's a lot of things that tie into this. There's so much court cases, and there's so much other things that are going on, and it is really confusing for a lot of people. But how do you how do you break it down? Because we've been getting emails since before session even started saying show up for work. It's
Right.
an expectation. You're elected to come into this position and show up, and sure, you have sicknesses, you got emergencies. There's been people who have been out for various reasons for extended periods of time. But there's an expectation when you are elected, you go down to the Capitol, you represent the people, the 43,000 in your district, you're expected to be there. They
Yeah, you have an
have
obligation.
exactly. It was kind of funny. I ran into an individual at an event from home, from in district, and they said to me, Mike, I hope you're showing up for work. And I said, you knew my dad. And she says, well, yeah, of course I did. My dad's been gone a few years. And I said, if I didn't show up for work, my dad would kick my butt. And she kind of chuckled. She said, yeah, yeah, you're right. I said, of course, even if the situation was we're in the minority, if it's a bad situation, I'm still going to be there. It's an expectation. We're going to do our jobs, no matter what the situation is.
Exactly.
And they have not shown up. So they
Like,
actually have denied us quorum two officially set up now. And we don't know what's going to happen. Are they going to sit out until the end of the special election? We don't know. We simply do not know.
so is that even legal to do that? Just to
There
not show up like
are
that?
there are many there's statutes, there's many things that'll probably get challenged. I said
Hmm.
this is the session that's going to spend more time in court than it is on the floor. And I'm afraid that's what's going to happen is one challenge after another. But I think to break it down, and we are talking a little bit about this before the show, that to make it simple that people understand, right? The
Right.
Democrats have been in control for the last 2 years, but more so in front of that, they've always had at least two branches of government. They've either had the House and the governorship, or they've had different, you know, variables of Senate, House, or governor for the last, I think 12 years. And now with this first tie, so we got to establish that, is there was tied 67-67 until one of their candidates, it was proven that he did not reside in his district. That went to court, and the judge says there is not sufficient evidence that this individual lived in his district. So that puts us at a 66-67. structure in the house or number in the house. And what you're seeing here is, I think what this comes down to is a group of individuals who has been in a certain level of control for quite some time, who are now reacting negatively because of the situation. And I've always said fear is a powerful motivator. And I think
Mhm.
this ties into what we were talking about before the show, the pros and cons of fear. You know, the cons of fear, what's going to happen? And this comes back to
Yeah.
something else, the golden rule, right?
Oh, treat others the
So
way you want to be treated.
that's right. But
Yeah,
for
I
the
got to
last,
touch on something that you just mentioned when you were talking about how the
sure,
Democrats have been in power for so long, and now that
yeah,
their power is kind of threatened or even diminished, that they're just not even showing up. They're kind of throwing a temper tantrum. Kind of made me think of toddlers. When they don't get their way, they start screaming and crying and throwing a fit. And this is one of my biggest complaints about politics is that you have people older than my grandma acting like toddlers, and it's so disappointing to see.
it
Like I
is.
look at Nancy Pelosi when she tore up that speech behind Trump when he was this a couple of years ago, it's like 2019 or 2020 at the State of the Union. She ripped the speech up behind him. I'm just thinking like, lady, it's just a piece of paper. You're just because you don't like the guy doesn't mean you should be tearing up a speech or even with the Democrats now, it's like there's an election. You guys can negotiate and get things done, but just not showing up screaming about things. It seems so immature, right?
I couldn't agree with you more. But now think about it in this perspective.
Okay.
You were in charge, you had the trifecta for the last 2 years. And in
Yep.
all honesty, that golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, that did
Right.
not apply for most everything in politics in the state of Minnesota in the last 2 years. We
Yep.
were
Because
treated with
I think it's
contempt.
because they thought they were going to retain their power so they could keep slamming things forward. So I don't think they expected accountability for their actions. In this last election, now they're being forced to. And maybe it's that fear you were talking about, where they're afraid of the consequences now of the past 2 years. And so maybe that's why they're keeping out.
I think you're exactly on to the point there.
Right.
When they didn't treat people, when they didn't treat those of us across the aisle in a manner that they would want to be treated, when they treated us with contempt,
Mhm.
when they excluded us from committee, when you brought up concerns and stuff about bills and you were basically mocked about things. And now the power balance is flipped a little bit because even a tie, now you at least have to treat the other side with a little bit of respect, dignity.
Yeah, could
And
you imagine that? Treating people with dignity as a Democrat? Oh my
well,
goodness.
and now the fear kicks in because you're fearful that you're going to be treated with the same contempt that you treated somebody else like with
Mhm.
for the last 2 years, 2 years plus. That's where the fear comes
Yeah.
in. And that's why I looked this up because, and I shared it with you, paralysis, the cons of fear, paralysis and inaction, perhaps not showing up for work, inaction, fearful of what's going to happen, anxiety and stress. We saw representatives who were basically hiding in their basements, not knowing what was going to happen. Well,
Yeah.
my thought is simply show up for work. And you'll find out that we're not going to be the same way that you were moving forward. Distorted perceptions. If you treat people poorly, there's an expectation that you're going to get treated the same way.
Yeah.
So now, here they are, knowing that we were treated, they treated us poorly the last 2 years, that they treated the voters in the state of Minnesota poorly for the last 2 years, and they're expecting the same thing.
Yeah.
Isolation. Fear can drive individuals to isolate themselves. This is a factor of fear and aggression and conflict. Now, this, I think, just lays it out so easily, so easy for people to understand. And they need to know a little bit of that background. And that's why I talk about the last 2 years. And I think that drives things moving forward. They are fearful because they did not treat people the way you would want to be treated, and now there's fear of retaliation. Well,
And
if you're not going to show up for work, the signs are definitely here, what I just read, that put the Democrats in those positions. And what are they going to do? They're going to hold out until the special election takes place, possibly in March. It's
oh
not
my
serving the
goodness.
people of this state.
No, it really isn't. And it's kind of interesting you bring up is that if can they even is that legal for them to hold out that long to deny a quorum? Like like the Secretary of State did announce that Congress was in session and legally like I'm just thinking about this like in my job if I don't show up for a couple of days I get fired. Can you can you really hold out for 2 months just not showing up? Is that a legal thing for Congress?
Um, there again, that's something else that I think could go to court.
Yeah.
There is statutes in there, and I don't have them here with me right now, but that says if you dereliction of duty, I think is one of them. If you're not doing your job, basically.
Yeah.
So it's going to be an interesting session. It's going to be an interesting 2 years with the tie, or not even tie. Let me clarify that as well, because we had a 67-67 tie.
Mhm.
There's a race in for
Shakopee.
no, no, no,
Oh,
the Curtis Johnson seat. I'll just call it that because most people can relate to
yeah.
that, understand the name. He was found to not be living in that district. I think that was the 40B race. And that special election probably will take place in March, give or take, somewhere in there. But what happens if that race goes to the Republicans? The
Yeah.
Democrats are saying that this is a strong Democrat area and we're going to win this race. Stranger things have happened. And there has been instances where a strong leaning area has flipped in a special election. So they're banking everything on that race. But what happens if it doesn't? And that puts us in a
Yeah.
68-66 number. And therefore, you're banking everything on a what if. That is motivated by the fear that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and that
And
gets tough.
yeah, the
Yeah, it's again, it's not going to be worth it. Like even if they're wasting so much time, and it really only hurts the voters. It really does because when you vote someone in, you expect like when you vote in a legislator, you expect them to legislate.
yes,
So that's
I
really interesting. It's a big, long, complex issue, and like we're trying to explain it as best we can. But really, all we got is that Congress is in session, and half of the state legislature just isn't showing up. It's a slap to the face of everyone in Minnesota, really. And it's a level of disrespect that you really have only seen from the Democrats in Minnesota.
exactly. Even with the court case that happened on Friday and we got the numbers out, what are the Republicans going to do? We're still showing up for work. We're
Yeah, and
showing up at the Capitol for work.
you guys are still voting on things.
Well, we were having committee moving forward because we don't officially or because we don't technically have a quorum because they're not showing up because of the court decision. But we're still supposed to be at the Capitol. We're doing the work of the people. It's research,
Exactly.
committee. If we can't pass a bill, that's fine. But we can be doing our work because there is a lot of prep work that goes into these bills. Committee hearings, discussions back and forth, research, just a ton of information gets passed around. But if you can't have the other side at those committee tables, if you can't have those discussions, then when it comes right down to it, and we don't have a quorum until March, now we have March, April, May, or the middle of March, we have a very short window to get our work done because the end of May, by law, I think it's the third Monday of May, something to that effect is how it's stated, is when
Okay.
session ends. But there's also deadlines in there about when bills have to be presented. And we
Yep.
might past some of those windows to even put bills forward in order to get them together to because the one important job we have to do this year is what? It's the budget.
Yep.
It's the state budget.
Could you imagine them, the Democrats boycotting all session and having no budget to work with this year or next year, or
And
just into
we
next
have
year?
on top of that is the looming deficit.
Yep.
This is horrible. We have a job to do to make sure that the entities of the state that deal with transportation, agricultural, energy, taxes, all of these things, we have a responsibility to get that work done so that government serving the people, and I use that's the term it's supposed should be, government serving the people can function. And if they hold out for a power struggle based on fear, then who loses? The people do.
Okay, so here's my next question, and then I think we have to switch topics here. If there's no quorum and there's no voting, let's just pretend that all year, would we be taxed if there's no one to vote on taxes? If you can't set a budget, can you set the tax rate?
Well, I believe that most of that stuff would just proceed with the current levels. The
Okay.
problem is, where do you spend that money? Because this is a proposed budget this year. The governor has already proposed his budget,
Mhm.
but there's fluctuations in there as to where taxes are going to come from. We have some shortfalls. We have a little bit of a surplus yet. Where is the money going to be spent?
Yeah.
And that's critical. And also, which taxes are taxes going to be dropped? Are they going to be increased? And I will actually give Walls an incredible amount of credit because he proposed a sales tax deduction or a dropping of 0.075% on sales tax. I don't know if you've heard about that.
I have, and I was a little disappointed that's less than, it's what, 0.075%?
0.075, correct.
So less than 1% tax decrease.
The
Be nice to
income,
see a little bit higher, but of a
it's,
decrease.
well, I understand that. And I would hope that the Republicans would push for more.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people are hurting. And when he did this, there's kind of a smoke and mirror thing here. He's cutting taxes for sales tax, which affect everybody in the state, correct?
Yep. Correct.
At the same time, there's also an increase in revenue. How do you cut taxes but still increase revenue? Because there's also increases in other areas
Yep.
that are going to affect people. So it's kind of a magician's sleight of hand. Look at what's happening over here with a sales tax decrease, but we're increasing taxes in other areas, which are going to affect you anyways, and you're going to pay more when it's all said and done because the
Yep.
budget got bigger because of it. So it's Walls is really good at promoting this. I will give him credit there, but the taxpayers need to know there's a bigger tax burden, even though you're going to hear that your taxes are going to get decreased. So
Right.
just to let you know. Um, what was the next issue you wanted to talk about?
Well, just real quickly, I just want to talk about your experience with the protests that happened last Tuesday, I believe. It'd be Tuesday the
Public,
20th, 21st,
public
I
safety
think.
meeting. Yes. And
Yeah,
I was
there's yeah, was it a bunch of trans activists that showed up at the Capitol, or is there just one who yelled at Walter Hudson for 20 minutes?
and that situation there, I think you could almost come back to the fear that we
Oh
talked
yeah,
about
it's
earlier.
that aggression that you mentioned at the end. Because
Aggression and
I'm
conflict.
aware that you have cows, and if you were to isolate one of your cows, they would become like fearful and they'd be more aggressive because of that.
We see it in
Not,
animals.
not calling trans activists cows, by the way. I'm just using cows as an example.
Thanks for clarifying. Like you said, I have cows, so
Yeah.
you know you're exactly right. You take an animal and you isolate it from the rest of the herd or the rest of the group, and they do become more aggressive. A lot of times you see it too, and bulls are a prime example. You keep the bulls away from the cows for a certain extended period of time, and they become aggressive.
Yeah.
So there's many reasons for that, but isolation is not a good thing. And what we're seeing here is fear and aggression rearing its ugly head in the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
That should never happen. And the
Yeah.
position,
So
I'm
just
sorry,
real quick, let's just walk through what happened on that Tuesday with the protest. Like, what did you see and experience?
I was not there. Let me just
Oh, okay.
clarify. So I'm not in public safety. It seems to me that that would be the wrong committee that you would want to do that to.
Yeah.
Most of the individuals that are on that committee are ex-officers or current officers, and potentially even carrying.
Yeah.
So I would think that would be the last place that you would want conflict. But
Right.
that as it may, they were actually had a rally of sorts earlier in the day on the Capitol steps, or just on the bottom of the steps, and I witnessed them there. They came into that committee and basically disrupted it, yelling and the profanities,
Hmm.
almost a constant barrage of profanities, which really is,
Kind of
um,
annoying.
I think it's more than annoying. If you want to get your point across, I think you can do it better than that.
Yeah, well, you
But
can do it in a civilized way.
exactly,
And part of the idea of proper legislation is doing things in a civilized way.
I agree.
Yeah.
We saw the videos, most people saw the videos, and it was, and I don't have any way of verifying, but it was promoted by a representative, apparently or supposedly, which is really unfortunate if that's true.
Yeah.
Because show up for work, and that'd be a
Yeah,
much
make your own
more
points.
that'd be a much more efficient way of having your voice heard in government rather than setting protesters in your stead.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had just heard that there was protests, so it was a rally. What were they protesting?
They were saying that what was happening there in those committees at the Capitol, that the Republicans were um, basically a coup
Okay.
when we are simply there doing the job that we've done every year at the beginning of session. I would say
Yeah,
if
just so they're mad that you're showing up for work.
I would say if there was a coup anywhere, it was on the Democrat side for not showing up.
Okay.
You're promoting um, government not functioning.
Mhm.
So I would say that would be the actual coup, not what we were doing.
Right.
But there again goes back to what we talked about earlier, that the pros and cons of fear and that aggression showing its ugly head. Very unfortunate. And I'm sorry that, Minnesota had to see this. I feel bad for the people that were in that room that had to experience it. So much for Minnesota Nice, but it says a lot about politics in our country right now. Um, you don't see this
Oh,
on our side.
absolutely. And this is going to be a great transition, Mike, because I guess another one, I guess I'm complaining about the idea of politics today, but politics in America is just so tied to emotion right now. Everyone's screaming about emotional status or how they're emotionally connected to whatever policy. So when you attack a policy, people will react emotionally because it's like you're attacking them specifically, even if
Yes.
it's just an idea. And again, this is a great transition because we're going to start talking about Trump's executive orders. And this emotional state of things is causing people to gravitate towards a more centralized authority figure like Trump. Now, granted, I'm really glad that Trump's, elected as president, and I would like to see a lot of his agenda get passed by Congress, but he's doing so much through executive order right now. And we had talked about this a little bit before the show, but is that a good thing that so many of his ideas are coming down from executive order specifically?
I don't think that it is.
Okay.
I think executive orders are a horrible way to govern. It is not the way it was originally intended. And I had pulled it up on my screen, but um, everyone knows I'm not tech savvy. And with this,
Well, that's
uh,
okay. I can vaguely remember some of the numbers because you had
sure,
mentioned George Washington had two executive orders.
when you look at the executive orders at the beginning, single digits, you see 8, 10, 1 or 2, and then it might get up into some double digits here and there, 20, 30. Um, it got excessive, I think, under a few of the presidents that we talked about, Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, FDR, I think had like 3,700 or 3,400 somewhere
I
in
think
there.
it was, I think, yeah, FDR had somewhere in the thousands. I think it was Woodrow Wilson who had the 3,700 roughly.
Okay.
And the big thing about that is Wilson governed during World War One, or he administered. He was president. And a big thing about him is he wanted to set up the League of Nations, which later became the United Nations. In a sense, Wilson was the first globalist president we've had in his pursuit of that. And I believe a lot of his, I don't remember all of his policies, but he definitely was trying to get a global thing going. And FDR, the famous New Deal, he was more of a socialist, government jobs, fighting the Depression, and then also dealing with World War II.
Correct.
So definitely the need, essentially, he saw a need for a strong centralized authority because of the crisis that they were in, which this is a whole other can of worms of a manufacture of, was it, shoot, I'm blanking on this. I'm not Joe Biden today, I promise. But taking advantage of a crisis. And so he has
Yes.
all these executive orders. And eventually we did win World War II. But yeah, and Trump has over 200 right now in his second week, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and well, one of them is just got shot down by a judge, and we'll see where that goes on the birthright citizenship, which really shouldn't be executive, but should be legislative. Mike, any thoughts?
Well, we talked about this a little bit before. Um, the birthright citizen, that is obviously um, it's in the Constitution. So
Okay.
that was going to be challenged. That is, I understand the intent there, but this is the wrong way of doing it. Plain and simple. He's
Yeah.
they need to go through the process if we want to change um, what the Constitution says. There's a process to do that. But I think he could have resided within the rules of government and not put out an executive order. I really dislike executive orders. It oversteps the branches of government. I understand some of the intent for doing it. At the same time, not all it doesn't two wrongs don't make a right necessarily. And here we are 200 into the second term. What is that? How does that bode for the rest of the next 4 years? Does it mean um, that's what we can expect the whole time is governing by executive order? I think that's horrible.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, and
did.
that's also kind of unnecessary because GOP does have all three branches of government at the federal level. They have the trifecta, so they should be able to get things moving the proper way, you'd think.
So it was FDR that had 3,700.
Oh, he was?
Woodrow Wilson came in next with 1,800.
Okay. So,
And
yeah, when it comes to that, I believe it's because they were in a period of crisis or big issues where they needed to act fast or believe they needed to act fast. And
but what you see is moving forward here. The last presidents, Donald Trump 220 on his first term, Obama 276, Bush 291, Carter 320, Johnson 385, I'm sorry, 325, Nixon 345, Clinton 365. So as we get into modern presidents, we see more and more use of the executive orders. And I always think back, we've talked about Paul Harvey many times, freedom to chains. And as government gets more and more radical, out of control, whatever you want to call it, um, we see the breakdown of the structure. We've talked about the history with the Greeks and Romans and ancient civilizations as they get closer to their decline.
More
Um,
and more centralized authority.
exactly. People look for a strong figure to step in and solve all these problems, and it ends up turning from um, more, like you said, more centralized power and can
And
very
less
easily,
rights through that.
exactly, can turn into dictatorship very easily. That
Yeah,
that's
the
it's
thing that's most disappointing to me, just real quick on the subject of centralized authority, is centralized authority does really well in a crisis where you need quick decision making, which is why I'll give, FDR the benefit of the doubt because he was dealing with the Great Depression and World War II roughly at the same time. Major crises, but we haven't had a major crisis, anything like that. You can say the recession of 2008 and maybe the recession of the early 80s, but we've lived in a time of relative peace in America and decent amount of prosperity even. So most of our anxiety as a nation is mostly self-inflicted. I don't know if you would agree with that, but we don't really need highly centralized government, and we can figure it all out on our own. But
what's one of those things in Freedom to Chains? He talks about as government gets bigger and supplies more and more to the people, the individual or the people themselves get littler.
yep,
As government offers more services, as they take more control, then the individual gets smaller. And we're seeing this more and more.
yeah,
Another
and I think
example,
it's sad and disappointing because there's no need for it.
well, we've
Again,
gone down this road in civilization how many times? We
oh,
have
countless. It's a cycle almost.
It is. We've had societies throughout history, and I've often wondered how many of them have sat, around a fire or whatever, talking like we are and saying, you know what, our culture is following the same path as before. We have all of the reams of history at our fingertips, and yet here we are traveling down the same road that so many others have. And it's frustrating to me. It's disappointing. I think we can do better.
Yeah.
But how do we do better is a good question. So, and I think that's part of this podcast, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one
Inform,
of our goals is speculating on how to do better and improve.
right?
Yeah. And also coming together. We
Yeah.
talk about that all the time.
Well, we
What?
talk about that. Unfortunately, we're doing this via Zoom, which is not coming together. But at
Yeah.
least get the opportunity to share the ideas. And I love the idea. I love when we get together and do this at a bar or something like that, and people join us, or they come and ask questions, or they talk to us afterwards. Um,
Yeah, it's
I,
great.
it goes a long ways.
Yeah, and we will be meeting up again and doing a couple of public podcasts coming up here. Just scheduling and, sessions and, we're in session regardless of whether or not the Democrats show up.
Right.
But yeah, it's just all work and we'll get there. And one of the cool things about the internet is we have this communication technology. However, us talking over Zoom like this as we are, does not fully emulate the aspect of meeting in public, where you can vibe off of somebody else's energy or just kind of that physical presence. Does that make sense?
No, I think you're exactly right. It's
Yeah.
entirely different if you and I had a disagreement about an idea here or a topic. When you're standing in front of someone face to face, it is different than over a Zoom call or over a phone call. There's
Yeah.
a separation of sorts um, and a lack of accountability in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with the levels of anonymity when you can post something on Facebook under a pretense of a different name or a different profile, which
And
happens quite a bit.
yep, and we see the nastiest, most vile attitudes come from that specifically. It's
Right.
really a unique thing. But I think we're running out of time here, so we're gonna have to wrap this up. It's good conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And I appreciate we talk about this too. We brought politics into this, but really the why of politics, and regardless of all the court cases, regardless of whether, one side's wrong or the other, what we see is the human factor in this. And I think that's a great thing to bring up.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, we're all just people and we're all neighbors and we're all Americans too. So there's no reason for us to be so hateful towards each other. But
Was it Sam Adams that says I disagree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it.
I don't remember who said that, but that's definitely a, f- a statement that belongs in our culture.
But nowadays, what happens if I don't like what Drew Peterson has to say, we cancel them.
Yeah, send them to jail. We'll find a crime.
That's right. We
Yeah,
try to silence those voices, and that's horrible.
yeah. But anywho, we'll leave on that. Yeah, leave a comment on how you think society should be and some of the issues you see and how important coming together is. But as always, this is Pints and Politics. You got Drew Peterson and Representative Mike Weiner. Thank you all so much for watching. God bless.
Thank you.